Jennifer Kyli Molloy was born in Edmond, Oklahoma, and grew up in a close-knit family. She was described as a kind and sweet individual who was beautiful inside and out. In 2016, 19-year-old Jennifer was living in an apartment near the University of Central Oklahoma when a horrible tragedy occurred. On October 5, 2016, she was found strangled to death in her apartment. While there were no signs of forced entry, her cell phone and laptop were missing. Despite an extensive investigation, Jennifer's case went unsolved for several years. Then, on May 6, 2024, Oklahoma police responded to a welfare check about a man sitting along an Oklahoma highway. Upon arrival, officers discovered a 28-year-old man named Joseph Tyler Beck sitting on the ground wearing a Super Mario shirt. Without hesitation, Beck confessed to killing Jennifer inside her apartment on the day she was found. Based on the disturbing details he was sharing, the officers knew they had their man. In an interview with investigators, Beck said he knew Jennifer from high school and had worked with her at the Subway sandwich shop for the last 2 years. It was there that he had developed an unhealthy crush on her. On the night of the murder, Beck admitted to inviting himself over to her apartment. Once there, the two began drinking and smoking marijuana. At some point, he made romantic advances, but she refused and asked him to leave. This request angered him, so he strangled her to death. He told investigators he was mad because he felt that Jennifer had wasted his time, despite him being the one who invited himself over. He then shockingly admitted that he planned to have sex with her, whether she was willing or not. Jennifer's loved ones were shocked when they discovered he was her killer. Investigators then searched Beck's home and discovered Jennifer's phone and laptop. He was then arrested and charged with her murder. In October 2024, Beck was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kelley Elizabeth Clayton, born Kelley Stage on August 1, 1980, grew up in Elmira, New York. Known for her outgoing personality, striking beauty, and love for life, Kelley was admired in her community for her dedication to her family. After high school, she worked as a waitress and later met Thomas Clayton, a former minor league hockey player. The couple married and settled in Caton, where they raised their 2 young children, a daughter and a son. While their life seemed to be picture perfect, all that would change in the fall of 2015. On September 28th at 12:39 a.m., Thomas called 911, saying he had returned home from a poker game and found Kelley's lifeless body. Police responding to the call discovered a grisly scene. Kelley had been brutally murdered in her home, suffering blunt force trauma from a fiberglass maul handle. The crime scene indicated a violent struggle, with evidence of the attack starting upstairs and ending in the kitchen. The couple's 2 children were in the house during the attack, but were physically unharmed. Investigators quickly ruled out a random attack, and since there were no signs of forced entry or robbery, Thomas immediately became a suspect. While his alibi placed him at a poker game, inconsistencies began to surface. Police uncovered that he had borrowed a friend's phone during the game to make a call, which connected him to Michael Beard, a former employee at his company. Phone records and frequent communication between the two revealed a murder-for-hire plot. Beard was brought in for questioning and immediately confessed to the crime, stating Thomas had offered him $10,000 to kill Kelley. Beard would later recant his statement, claiming he was only hired to burn down the house, but investigators had all the evidence they needed. Thomas's motive became clearer as investigators delved deeper. A year before the murder, he had doubled Kelley's life insurance policy. Reports also emerged that he was romantically involved with other women and feared losing everything in a divorce. Witness testimony, phone records, and life insurance changes painted a picture of financial and personal motivations. Then came an unlikely witness, Kelley's 7-year-old daughter, who ultimately played a pivotal role in solving the case. She was in the house with her younger brother during the murder and recounted hearing loud noises and seeing a man in the house who wore a mask that was similar to one her father used while hunting.
How did the robber leave?
The garage.
And what did you see after that?
She was sort of suffering, Okay.
I tapped her with the hockey stick, and I hugged her leg.
Okay. All right. And where was Mom when you hugged her?
Laying down in the kitchen with water over.
Okay.
Could have been my dad, but he looked like my dad.
Okay. How did he look like your dad?
The mask and his shoes.
And have you seen anybody wear that mask before?
My dad.
Did the robber say anything?
Barbara didn't say anything because what if it was my dad? You could recognize his voice.
She kept saying the man looked like her father. The man she was actually seeing was Beard, but because officers determined Thomas had planned the whole thing, he was also arrested and charged with her murder. The trial exposed a web of lies and premeditation. Thomas had multiple affairs in 2014 and 2015, with one of the girls being as young as 15. 3 of the females, including the 15-year-old, testified that Thomas complained to them that Kelley was lazy and that he was planning to leave her. However, he told another woman that he couldn't get a divorce because Kelley would take everything. As for his friendship with Beard, people who knew them said he often kept Beard in his debt, providing him with money and a car to drive. In the end, Beard was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Thomas continued to maintain his innocence, but the evidence, though largely circumstantial, was overwhelming. He was convicted of first- and second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Suzanne Armstrong and Susan Bartlett met in high school and remained friends for years. By 1977, they were roommates living in Collingwood, a suburb of Melbourne, Australia. 28-year-old Suzanne was a school teacher, and 27-year-old Susan worked as a librarian. Both women were well-liked and described as kind, intelligent, and independent. Suzanne had a 16-month-old son, Gregory, who also lived with them. On the evening of January 10, 1977, they were spending the night at home when a neighbor reported hearing screams coming from their home. Unfortunately, the person never investigated or called the police. 3 days later, on January 13th, when concerned friends had not heard from them, they made their way inside the home through the back door and made a horrifying discovery. Suzanne was found in her bedroom and Susan in the hallway. Both had been stabbed multiple times, Suzanne 29 times and Susan 55 times. Investigators determined that both women had also been sexually assaulted. Gregory, Suzanne's son, was found alive in his crib, severely dehydrated but unharmed. The crime shocked the local community and drew significant media attention. Police launched an extensive investigation, but they couldn't identify a suspect despite their efforts. The case eventually went cold, becoming one of Australia's most infamous unsolved murders. For decades, the lack of progress haunted the victims' families and the public. The home on Easy Street stood as a grim reminder of the brutal crime. Finally, in 2024, after nearly 47 years, there was a breakthrough. Using advancements in DNA technology and forensic genealogy, investigators identified Perry Carrombliss, a now 65-year-old man, as the suspect. Carrombliss, who would have been 17 at the time of the murders, lived in Melbourne before relocating to Greece. He was then arrested in Rome, Italy in September and extradited back to Australia in December to face charges for the murders of Suzanne and Susan. At this time, Carrombliss remains in jail, awaiting the outcome of the case. 32-year-old Lee Michael Holdbrooks and 28-year-old Christopher Yancy were well known and respected in the small community of Pelham, Alabama, not only in their professional circles, but also in their personal lives. While Lee and his wife had no children, they had recently celebrated their 4th wedding anniversary. He also adored their dog, Oreo, whom he had just taught to catch a frisbee. Described as humble, religious, and always willing to help, Lee was a dedicated member of Amazing Grace Worship Center. He served as a youth sponsor, worked the church's sound system, and helped with the softball team. Christopher, who was 6 feet 6 inches tall, was known as a gentle giant with a heart to match. He chaired the church maintenance committee and enjoyed spending time with his wife and their 2 young children. His pastor described him as a dedicated family man and friend who avoided recognition for his good deeds. Lee and Christopher were close friends and both graduated from Thompson High School, Lee in 1985 and Christopher in 1989. Sadly, in the summer of 1999, a horrible tragedy occurred. On August 5th, Alan Eugene Miller, armed with a .40 caliber Glock pistol, walked into Ferguson Enterprises, where he worked as a delivery truck driver. Once inside, he shot both Lee and Christopher multiple times. Evidence suggests that Lee tried to crawl approximately 25 feet toward an exit before Miller delivered a fatal close-range shot. Christopher, on the other hand, was paralyzed by the initial gunshot and found slumped under a desk where Miller delivered a final fatal shot. Miller then drove a few miles to Post Air Gas, another of his former workplaces. There, he confronted his former supervisor, 39-year-old Terry Jarvis, accusing him of spreading rumors about his personal life. Miller quickly shot Jarvis multiple times, killing him as well. Despite the chaos, Miller spared other employees at both locations, targeting only those he believed were involved in the rumors. After the shooting, he fled the scene, but was later apprehended by police on an Alabama highway. It took 4 officers and 4 sets of handcuffs to subdue him. Inside his vehicle, officers found the Glock on the driver's seat and an empty ammunition magazine on the passenger seat. According to trial testimony, Miller's motives stemmed from his belief that the men were spreading rumors about his sexuality. A defense-hired psychiatrist testified that Miller suffered from severe mental illness, but his condition did not meet Alabama's legal standard for an insanity defense. In the end, Miller was sentenced to death. His execution was initially scheduled for September 22, 2022, but was called off when prison staff failed to access a vein due to his morbid obesity. Unable to complete the execution by the midnight deadline, the state postponed it. During this final attempt, Miller filed a federal lawsuit, and Alabama agreed to use nitrogen gas as the execution method. Miller expressed concerns about the execution, jokingly stating, "I've got a big old head," when discussing how the mask would fit. On September 26, 2024, he was executed by nitrogen gas in Atmore, Alabama. Sadly, Christopher's wife passed away in a car accident in 2012, leaving their children without both parents. Vickie Lynn DeBlieux was born on April 18, 1956, in Ouachita Parish, Louisiana. At age 37, she was the mother of a 12-year-old daughter and was described as unique, spontaneous, wild, and funny. On the night of February 24, 1994, Vickie was dropped off by a friend near Chattanooga, Tennessee, and began hitchhiking to her mother's house, located in their hometown of West Monroe, Louisiana. While passing through Jefferson County, Alabama, she encountered evil when she accepted a ride from 4 teenagers in a van who offered to drive her to Louisiana. All 4 teens, 19-year-old Carrie Dale Grayson, 17-year-old Trace Duncan and Kenneth Loggins, and 16-year-old Louis Christopher Mangione, were drinking and using drugs when they first met her. At some point during the trip, Vickie sensed something was wrong when they deviated from the route. Scared, she attempted to escape, but they began throwing beer bottles at her, restrained her, and all began to kick and beat her in the woods until she was dead. Afterward, the 4 kept her luggage and body inside the back of a pickup truck and drove to Bald Rock Mountain near Pell City, Alabama, where they stole her ring and clothes and sexually abused her body before throwing it off the cliff. The body was left behind while the youths drove the truck to Pell City to clean the vehicle and remove the bloodstains. They also disposed of her luggage in the woods. The 4 then went back to Birmingham, where Mangione was dropped off at home before the rest, Grayson, Duncan, and Loggins, returned to Bald Rock Mountain, where the trio severely desecrated her remains. The trio then spent the night in Birmingham. The next morning, Grayson's girlfriend found the 3 sleeping, covered in mud and blood. When his girlfriend probed him about the bloodstains, Grayson lied to her that they had got all the blood from a dog. 4 days after she was murdered, whatever remained of her body was discovered by 3 rock climbers at the bottom of a bluff near Odenville, Alabama. It didn't take investigators long to identify the teenagers after one of them bragged about the murder and even showed a friend one of Vickie's severed fingers. By April, all 4 youths were arrested and charged for the torture and murder of Vickie. The condition of her remains was so severe, the medical examiner required a previous x-ray of her spine to compare. In the end, Grayson, Duncan, and Loggins were sentenced to death, while Mangione, the youngest, received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. However, their death sentences were commuted to life sentences in 2005 after Alabama agreed to change the law and prohibit the execution of minors younger than 18 at the time of their offenses. This left only Grayson on death row. 30 years after the brutal crime, on November 21, 2024, 52-year-old Kerry Dale Grayson was executed using nitrogen gas. When the warden read his death warrant and offered him an opportunity for final words, he responded with an obscenity, "For you need to F off." After the microphone was turned off, Grayson continued shouting profanities. During the execution, Grayson raised both middle fingers in a final act of defiance as he was strapped to a gurney and fitted with a respiratory mask. He was pronounced dead at 6:33 p.m., about 10 minutes after the process began.